This is the last and fifth of our sessions, and we've been preparing. We've been for the last few weeks having conversations and dialogues around the topics that are surprisingly difficult to talk about, not just with each
Yeah.
other, but with people around. And this is our ritual. This is the moment when we're going to sort of share with the world like a very experimental thing. I've never seen this done online, let alone in LinkedIn. And the reason we're doing this, for those of you watching, is that we're being a little bit edgy and provocative, perhaps for some, by taking some of these taboo topics, which is around gender harmony, the conscious feminine, the conscious masculine, and how do we represent those. And what we're going to do with Gitte this morning is not actually do it for ourselves only. We're doing this on behalf of a symbolic conscious masculine, conscious feminine in society, which we're representing. So when we talk in first person, Gitte, this is not about you and I talking only in our first names. It's also talking on behalf symbolically. And so those of you watching who want to ask some questions, we're going to have some chat as well. But this is really a moment where we're coming together with all that we've investigated around gender harmony or disharmony, things that might need forgiving, things that are actually to be celebrated as well, and gratefulness. And so before we jump in, Gitte, are you ready for this? Have you had a good enough weekend to actually start the week with one of these rituals?
Yeah, like quite a start to the week, huh? I have been so excited to do this talk with you, this little coffee date. I am so ready and I'm so curious and excited both to do this from my part, but also to have the interaction with you and to see what you will bring to the table, not as an expectation, but as a joy.
Well, here's what we prepared. Like, I think you probably have yours already because we talked about the rune this morning, but this is what we left last time, last session 4. We thought, let's go off and prepare an intention, 2 questions that can be used anytime, and 3 topics. Of course, this is just the beginning. Like, we could, maybe if we created a hashtag out of this, like hashtag gender harmony or gender forgiveness, this could be something that would go on for hundreds and hundreds of years. There's so much to be put in that topic. So this is just scratching the surface.
I love gender forgiveness. That's really beautiful. That
Let's
touched me.
capture that.
Yeah,
Gender
that's
forgiveness. That
I
might be the hashtag that we'll use after this and share. So should we just start with intention? Because before we
yeah.
go into the topics of forgiveness, the maybe even also the gratitude topics, like maybe we start from your intention, my intention for doing this ritual, because a ritual is only a ritual when there is a meaning and an intention that is clearly put on the table. So do you want to go first, or should I go first?
It depends. Will your insecurity be triggered by my awesomeness?
You go first. I think with that, you should go first.
Okay, but my intention actually have a little story behind it. When we talked about this in previous episodes, when I got divorced, I had like a big bloom in my femininity and my inner goddesses and the whole feminine perspective. And I actually decided to get this tattoo. And what it says is, I'm the hero of this story. I don't need to be saved. And for me, that was such an empowerment and such an empowering quote for me. It has something to do with my independence, but it also has something to do with the fact that 99% of all females in the West, we grow up with Disney and we are being taught that we need to be saved. So we're holding on until like this man comes along and then he needs to save us. We can't literally be sleeping and be awoken. So that kind of crashed after I got a divorce and I decided that I was like gonna do this on my own and I don't need a man and like I'm empowering myself. And what I actually really learned most of all from our talk is the gender forgiveness and that I would say I'm not supposed to do it on my own, but that I actually really want to have this balanced harmony between the genders. So coming to my intention, Wednesday, I went to do a purging ceremony with Cambo, and I had two dots, and I had them just beside my tattoo, and that was like half a year ago. And then I wanted to have three dots this time, and this is like burning marks. And she asked me if I wanted to have like a pattern. And I just suddenly realized that I did. And there is a rune, if you can show it. In Danish, it's tyr. It's also tyr or tivas. So the dots that I have had, you can see I have the scars here, is about to be that. At some point, I'll have three more dots to really make it stand out bigger. And for me, this rune is one of the most masculine runes. It's also the rune of the god Tyr, and he's the one that lost his hand for the Fenris Wolf. So it's also about sacrifice, but I think it's not a sacrifice that you're not willing to give, but a sacrifice for the benefit of the whole society. It's also a leading star and a compass needle. So it's to show the way. And for me, being strong in my femininity with the I'm saving myself, but also like I want the male energy to show me the way when we're finding our way down the mountain. I couldn't find a more beautiful intention for our ritual today.
Wow. Yes. Tia is one of the runes I actually drew on my head as I'm growing my hair. I was last week doing a ritual, like drawing three runes on the back of my head with a semi-permanent marker, which one of them was Tia, actually.
Mm.
So interesting connection there with the other one is actually the one you're wearing around the neck. So for me, the intention is actually I'm not stealing from you. I'm borrowing from what you just said. It also
Feel
goes back
free.
to the divorce that I had about 10 years ago, where for me it was not only a divorce, it was also a rebooting of gender roles. And in particular, because it happened just after my mother passed away and who had a so deep influence on my view of gender roles, her being very sort of modern women, very feminist, and passed away, I realized exactly what you just said, that I had been nurtured in this idea that my role was to look after the women around me, my mother, my wife, my ex-wife, my daughter, and all the women friends. And I was carrying that burden, but also that myth of having to look after and save
Yeah.
the women. So for me, the intention of this ritual is to close that cycle that was kind of opened up 10 years ago when I came to Finland. But now I feel there's a cycle that's completing where I'm tapping into that inner feminine energy of going, first of all, let me nurture and look after my own inner feminine before I start, treading outside and looking at other people and being a bit like what you just said with your beautiful symbolic, I'm looking at my direction with the rune. I'm kind of going within. On if I had to choose a rune, I would choose Berkana, which is the rune with
Mm.
the
Yeah. It's
the
almost
like the
like a
bee,
bee. Yeah.
like a bee. That's it. Which is the rune of growth, actually, the growth, and also a very feminine rune.
Yeah.
So my intention is twofold. It's finding harmony within of gender, because gender is a construct, but it's also energetically something around. In Asia, they would talk about it with polarity of yin and yang. So it's, for me, first and foremost, the intention is to harmonize within, so that when I show up on the outside, I can also pay respect, pay homage to any gender, man, woman, non-binary, and turn up with all of those different gender variations with peace and harmoniously, looking at them as all mutually fulfilling, mutually helping, mutually beautiful, and collaborative, like that there is a purpose in all of these different ways of being different. In other words, celebrating diversity. So that's my intention for this ritual.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you for sharing it.
So I think what we could do is start from a question. We probably had a couple of questions that we wanted to prepare to ask each other symbolically on behalf of the other gender. Like,
Mm.
coming to this ritual, you're coming identifying as a woman, I'm coming identifying as a man, but we're also both looking at gender harmony within. So with that in mind, do you have a particular question do you want to start with, or shall I start with mine?
I think I started last time. Feel free to start this time.
Ah, okay. So my question is, in everyday life, where I have not yet had a conversation on gender in everyday life, I've seen a lot of people using irony, sarcasm, blame around the topics of gender, but very rarely have I had an opportunity to show actively with words or behaviors gender respect. And as a woman, I'm asking you on behalf of men, like, if I do want to display gender respect without being an asshole, without being labeled as being protecting or, condescending or mansplaining or anything like that, how would you see that every like is it the best thing to ignore it, which is what a lot of men tend to do, is they just simply don't address that elephant in the room? Or is there something in terms of behavior, and I'm talking concrete communication behaviors, like, for example, I would hold the door for a man, I would hold the door for a woman. Now, to me, that is respecting another human. It's not
Yeah,
about gender. But
yeah, I
like
get.
in that sort of level of tangibility, what can I do as a man to show gender respect?
I love the question, and I think it's really deep. So thank you first of all for asking it. And I think there really isn't like one right answer because it depends on the level of consciousness. You mentioned that you have met women, or I think it's like your daughter had friends that were saying a lot of things, but when it came down to action, it was actually something completely different.
Mm.
And I think it's kind of the same here because for some women, it will be so provocative that you're holding the door, and for others, it would be so provocative if you didn't. I think you can say it in like different ways. I've always loved the quote that I don't want a man to protect me because I can't protect myself. I want a man to protect me because I'm worth it. And that's like a beautiful thing to say, but how do you get that into your everyday life? So I actually think it is addressing the elephant in the room, but this also requires that you have the gut or like the courage to do it. So what I would say personally, but I think it's also the easiest way to answer is to say I would love a man to say I want you to help me to be aware. How can I best respect you as a woman? Because there will be different boundaries. Some women would love for you to hold the door. Some would like to have you pay the bill. That can be discussed. But also, it can be like, hey, when we had this other couple over, I actually realized that you were interrupting me a bit. I would love to talk with you about that because it felt condescending. So it's actually to have that open debate, and as a man to really like allow your woman or a woman to speak that out loud and be open for that communication would be my best answer.
So being open and being acknowledging the worthiness of the other in some way through the behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Thank
like every woman will have a different boundary or a different awareness about this topic.
you.
So I think like just also for me, I'm thinking like already there, like I'm cheering for that relationship or like that communication form that, hey, let's talk about it and let's be aware of this. And there are so many areas that I, as a woman, speaking on behalf of women, feel that men are not aware of, that you literally do not see. And instead of blaming you for not seeing it, like I want us as females to educate you. Yeah.
Digesting that one, thank you. Do you have one question for me?
Yeah, I'm just gonna start a little differently because I also asked a lot of different women, like, hey, if you could ask
Mm.
men one thing, and I had some really fun one coming up. Like I have one of my yoga therapist students asking, like, she's like in her 60s. She's like, why can men not meet up without alcohol or beer? I thought that was really interesting or funny. So I have had like a lot of like more general, but I kind of wanted to go a little deeper. And this actually is a little bit circled. because in our first talk, you were showing that amazing video, Beyond Man and Masculinity, and you were talking about some of men's biggest fears is being ridiculed by a woman. And I interrupted you and were a little bit perhaps like, yeah, but women's biggest fear is for men to kill them. And I think that's an interesting balance. But actually, what I want to ask is, why is that the worst thing a man can experience, to be ridiculed by a woman?
Ridiculed.
Yeah, ridiculed.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to connect it to the other question about alcohol as well, because I think they're interconnected, actually. I grew up in England a lot, partly in England, and in university in England, like it's a general rule that students tend to socialize around alcohol, men and women. And what that usually does is that it creates this sense of courage. In a general climate of insecurity where people are very insecure about who they are and their identity, the alcohol lowers that fear. And I think it's where also the ridicule comes in, is that behind all the bravado that many men display, particularly misogynistic jokes, there's a deep insecurity, there's a deep fear, there's a knowledge that, you know, they're all coming from a mother. There's the voice of their critical potential mother or absent father, who's looking at them and telling, you should be ashamed, you're ridiculous. And the ridicule that can be voiced by somebody is really just echoing with a much deeper internal fear that many men are holding or not even willing to talk about, which I think on behalf of what I've seen with men, there is such a fear of doubting oneself when, as you pointed out with the rune of direction, that is what we're brought up as men to see, is that we're the ones who should bring direction, be clear with ourselves, have a life goal, have a mission, have a plan for your career, have this, everything has to be directional. And so suddenly when somebody ridicules you, it challenges that very sense of identity and direction that are connected for many men, where they become who they are because they provide a sense of direction to others, either in a leadership position, in their relationship to their partners, to their children. So the ridicule comes from, like, am I just not worthy? It's not about the actual fear of the other gender. It's just the fear. I think it's a fear of unworthiness.
Wow. That's really sad.
It's what it is, and I think it's changing, and that's where we are like on the edge of a forward wave of thinking differently, but it's going to take time for that in some societies and bubbles and social circles for it to even be a topic of conversation. So thank you for that question. And I don't think the only fear of men towards women in conversation is obviously about being ridiculed. I think some of them are afraid of many other things as well.
Yeah, agreed.
I think this is a good transition. I've got music in my ears. I don't know about you, but I've got some kind of good, powerful music, which I'll share afterwards as a little gift to you and to anybody who's going to watch this. It's a playlist I made around African women artists who are extremely underrepresented in the music industry in Africa. A lot of the top charts are men. And so this is like power women, divas, acoustic. And well, actually, you know what? I'm talking about it. Let me just put it up, and then you might even want to have that in the background. But basically, this playlist for me is feeding this conversation around the beauty of music being non-gender.
I'm just gonna
You can probably catch that with your phone. There's some very dynamic music, and there's some very gentle music, very acoustic music. But this playlist for me is a sort of homage, an ode to African women. And I just thought it'd be appropriate as a gift also for this sort of, you know, as a sacrifice, you always put something. We don't need to sacrifice a goat these days. I can sacrifice a musical playlist.
Then I have to return the goat.
You don't. You can keep the goat. So What
I
we
would
could
love
do.
another question if you have another one for me.
Ooh, yes, I do. It's about worship. I think deep down, most humans want to be loved, but secretly want to be worshipped, not in a divine way, but more in a, at first they sort of formulate it in their head as being, I would like to be accepted. But then if you really dig down, it's more like not just accepted, but liked and appreciated, and why not worshipped? And if we use the word worship with a sort of spiritual and almost like a tantric twist to it, which is like worshipping the divine in the person, not worshipping the body,
Yeah.
um, how can men worship women?
I think this is actually a little difficult for me because in some way I feel like I'm not as most females are, because I think for a lot of females there is like this pleaser, there is this learned or built in from society and growing up that we are actually not allowed to receive, we are only allowed to give, and that it's our job to please and to give and to make sure everything is good, because like we are the responsible one, like within the home and the caretaker. So I think it's actually difficult for a man to really like figure out, how do I break that code and actually get to the point where I can let her relax and receive and be worshipped for her inner goddess. So it is difficult for me to answer, because like I'm opposite. I'm like, yeah, please worship me a lot. um, so I think it's actually, again, from what you said, start by allowing yourself as a man to really see her and appreciate her. I think this is also just a general thing, but there need to be the awareness that it is perhaps more difficult for a woman to let go of that role or that hat as the main caregiver, because she will always be like, yeah, but I need to do the dishes, or I need to clean first, or we also need to schedule the appointment for the kids, or whatever. So prepare it, allow yourself to take action and say, like, you know what, this hour tonight between 8 and 9, it's all about you. Set a stage, light the candles, massage her, but not necessarily it needs to go somewhere. That's a whole other topic, but like, it doesn't have to be sex.
Mm,
If she takes initiative, you could, but often women associate having a massage from their partner with, okay, that's foreplay. But
mm,
actually, like seeing her, worshiping her without the intent of sex, and buy her flowers. Like, that's also, I think, like a little bit of an issue nowadays. Should you do that? Yes, of course you should, because they love it. Figure out what is her love language. There are like so many tests you can take. Love languages. How do you actually make her feel loved? Allow yourself to actually take this time and use it, because most women also feel that the man doesn't see her. We all know that, like, and you didn't even see I went to the hairdresser, or you didn't see I get a new dress, or whatever. So notice her, notice what is important for her, and show that you care this way. Yeah, I think that's like the best answer I can give. Is, and also like the most practical one, because we could go out on a like a very philosophic way, but I think like
yeah,
tangible. I love it
yeah.
tangible.
Thank you.
Great. So I actually have two questions that I want you to choose from yourself, because I think perhaps one of them might be connected to the other one. And this is also something that came up during my talks with other women. And the first one is, why is men so afraid of emotions? Like talking about them. It could be like when you're in a discussion with your partner and they're like, yeah, she just kept going, or like, stop, I had enough, or like they just freeze. The other question is, why is it so difficult for men to understand a rejection or a no? So you can choose for yourself which one, or perhaps you can like do a little waving and have them both in. I don't know.
Well, actually, they are intertwined,
Yeah,
because I
I
think
thought.
the fear of rejection is often linked to the negative feelings of that rejection that are triggered within. And I think what I've noticed is that the two feelings that are the most difficult for men to express around women are joy and anger. Sadness is closely followed up, but often what I've heard from guys is that I can cry in front of a woman friend or my woman partner or my sister, and they'll be like, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's okay." But the minute I express anger in the exact same way without blaming, I can be sad without blaming. I can be angry without blaming.
Yeah,
But with the exact same level of expressivity, the anger is never received positively. And therefore, because that anger is real in me and I can't express it, what I'm afraid of is that how do I know what feelings are welcome and which ones are not? When I know that the ones that are the most difficult are generally not the most welcome, then I have to go not only aware of my feelings, but I have to censor some that I know are badly received because of. I think there's also a slight gendering around feelings, even though it is a stereotype that it's anger, sadness, and joy are, I think, where you really notice gendering most. Is that men are generally less expressive of joy, women are more expressive of sadness, men more expressive of anger. And so the fear, why they're so afraid, is because they're, I think, afraid of not being heard and received in their feelings and being judged as aggressors, dominators, assholes, immature young boys shouting and being having a tantrum, when in fact the anger might be quite legitimate and quite healthy to express, even without it being blamed or linked to physical expression or even
yeah,
shouting. So I think the fear is the fear of not being heard, the fear of not being received, and also the internal chaos that comes from the rejection of, if I can express sadness, but the minute I express anger, I get shut down, then that rejection is quite hard when the partner has been saying, you need to receive me in my sadness.
yeah.
So I think there's this double fear of internal what it triggers and externally how is it received.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense to me, but it doesn't in regards to the rejection. I get a lot of personal messages on social media, and these vary a lot. It's like, do you want to come to my vacation house and pee on my carpet for 10,000 euros? Till, hey, that's an interesting name. What country are you from? And for me, like, there are dating apps and they are not Instagram, they are not Facebook, they are not that kind of social media. So for me, it's actually like a little bit annoying. And men just don't get it. And I'm trying to be polite here. I always try to be polite and say, like, you know what? This is not a dating app. I'm not interested. We can follow each other. That would be inspiring. Have a nice day. And
Mm.
then today, I actually had that today. And the next message was like, did you sleep well? And I'm like, what the what? But also sometimes men get really aggressive when you turn them down. And it's like, you know what, bitch? You look fat. I wouldn't fuck you if I had the chance. And I'll be like, well, excuse me. So, mm,
So you meant rejection in the sense of being, somebody interested intimately and being rejected on that. Now, one of the things that's difficult for men is the unclear rejection, because rejection by saying I'm not interested in this is not the same as I'm not interested in that. Like if I say I'm not interested in having a conversation now, it doesn't mean I'm not interested in having a conversation later. So I think for some men, they don't read very well what we call the signified meaning, that like what is implied is not always very clear. Like the rejection might be implied in a no, but it might not be seen by the receiver as a rejection. Plus, on top of that, just to add, is that setting boundaries, and this is not a gender problem, I don't think, is generally associated with saying, at best, sorry. Like I place a boundary. If you place a boundary and I come up to you and I knock on your social media profile and I say like, hey, do you want to have a date? And that you say no, most people who are trying to be respectful will say, oh, okay, sorry. Uh, in the worst case, they'll be an ass. In the best case, they'll say sorry. But if we were to actually reprogram our brain and say thank you for the boundary, not just for you to feel that it was okay to place a boundary and say no, but also for me to recognize that that boundary is a clarity that helps me build trust potentially with you. It's not just to know, walk away, but it's a way of knowing more where you stand with your boundaries, therefore builds trust. I think that's one of the hidden reasons why it's so difficult for men to accept rejection, is that they don't know how. They don't have a textbook. They don't even know that you can say thank you. They think the only possible reaction is either indignation and anger, or sorry in the best case. So
Hmm.
partly, I think it's also just ignorance, social communication ignorance of how the psychology of interaction could work differently.
So, what could we do as women to help you with that?
That's a third question. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I think it's a very timely question, because its society is really in that topic right now. I think one of them is to be clear with boundaries and needs, because saying something unclear will be confusing. Like if for example, I say, no, I don't want to talk right now, that is not meaning I don't want to talk ever.
Yeah.
So being clear, like unambiguous, like I'm not interested in having sex with you is clear. I'm not interested in talking with you is not clear, because it implies that you still might be interested in other things. And
Hmm.
that ambiguity is terribly difficult for guys to deal with, because they're generally not as emotionally woke or aware of the nuances between saying something directly, and also there's a language barrier, to be fair, like if you're a native speaker versus not.
Also, I think that I this of course do not apply for me, but because I feel like I'm actually really clear in my communication. But I think a lot of females, they have this idea that they don't want to hurt no one. So we are like brought up to be like really polite. So I think like I do understand that a lot of females will not communicate their boundaries very well. This is something I work with females a lot, putting out the boundary and being okay with it. And so I do see your point that if as a female I'll be like, yeah, this is not a good time right now. That's not a rejection. That is like, call me later. So I do see it, but I do also think it is interesting that when I do communicate a very clear line, like I'm not interested in writing with you, that he keeps writing, for example. But I got my answer and I cheated with an extra question, so thank you.
And by the way, there's a huge cultural dimension to this, is
Yeah,
that
of course.
in some cultures, no is the default standard response from women to men. And the expected next response is showing insistence, is to show that you are interested. And that is not the case in Scandinavia. So
No.
culturally, we've got to be sensitive here that what we're talking about is in the context of Northern culture, with a very high degree of social equity, also social trust, and gender relations that are, I would say, a little bit more equal than other parts of the world. So and in this culture, men are often quite challenged to put boundaries and be clear with their needs as well. So I don't think it's only a gender problem. I think it's a fundamental human problem of being able to know your needs, express your boundaries, and do so with a smile and without aggression is an
Yeah.
art that is, I would say, beautiful to teach in schools from the age of probably 3 onwards, when the no phase starts, that they learn
Yeah.
to say no without a tantrum. Like no is a smile, can be a smile.
Great. Thank you.
Let's go into forgiveness stuff, because I think we're already like opening up topics which are inviting forgiveness. And the word forgiveness has the word giving. And what I wanted to invite in our mutual forgiveness is, again, on behalf of men, on behalf of women. So it's not necessarily something you've lived personally, or you, but to be concrete, to be tangible. And we can take 3 topics. There's plenty. There's literally hundreds, but it can be contemporary topics or historical topics. But I would invite us to do that with something that we can attach to a real moment situation, like we talked about last time. So, and maybe to avoid this going into a discussion, which can easily take us hours, that when you share something that you ask forgiveness for, I could just basically hear and thank you. and then say, on behalf of men, I forgive you for that, so that it doesn't become a dialogue which opens up, and then we switch to maybe doing that in the other way. How does that sound?
I would love to have a discussion, but let's see if there is time. So let's do it, and then perhaps we can like conclude or something after.
Okay, well, we can try the first one. We can see if the discussion takes us into, because it might segue into the next one. So I could start, because
Yeah,
then
do it.
the power. Men in general are extremely silent about these topics of gender equality, gender equity, which is even not often talked about. And I'm thinking back to office, very, very common office, not just in Finland, but in places where you've got a multi-gendered team and where somebody cracks a sexist joke, a little pike, a moment of, oh, but we can't let the women in the team deal with this. On behalf of men who have power, whether it's at work, whether it's political, whether it's even cultural or artistically, when men behave like that with cynical, sarcastic humor around gender roles, it's extremely hurtful. It's also slightly unfair because it doesn't allow the conversation to really go, because we can always say, oh, it was just a joke. Why are you taking it so personally? And so particularly misogynistic humor in the workplace, I've seen it so often, which is a slippery fish. It's hard to even then address, because the person always backtracks and says, oh, you just can't take a joke, can you? So on behalf of men who have done this, I ask forgiveness to all of women for these misogynistic, cynical, hurtful jokes that replicate the toxic patterns of the past.
On behalf of womankind, we forgive you for not knowing better, and thank you for your asking forgiveness. I actually don't have anything to comment.
I thought you were going to go off on like, okay, let's dissect this, but no, you see, it kind of works.
No, I think that was very beautiful and righteous. So, as women, we are really, really, really good at blaming men, especially as fathers and husbands, for not participating, for not driving the kids, for not planning teacher or like school home conversations, or doing lunch breaks, or knowing when there is soccer or ballet. We are really, really good at blaming you for not putting the dishes into the dishwasher the correct way, for not setting the table the right way, for not seeing that there need to be vacuumed. And we really blame you for this. And this is like such an amazing topic for us women to really bound like and connect about, like, yeah, and then he did this and then he did this, and we blame you and we are so mean to you. So on behalf of all women, I would like to ask for your forgiveness, that we are blaming you instead of holding you accountable and helping you see how we actually would love to be met when you act out as a husband and a father. So please forgive us.
This touches me particularly also because I've been part of this group of men who like to take a bigger chunk than average in the household, um, cooking, cleaning, tidying, dealing with house, not just now, but in the past. So that touches me a lot, what you just said. And on behalf of men, I think it's easy to forgive that, because behind that is a need to bond. It's a need to have a common enemy, which you know how it goes. It's always the common enemy is the one that creates connection between people. So then
Yeah,
being the common enemy in that sense is totally forgivable because of the deep need for sharing the load. So on behalf of men, I receive that. Thank you.
thank you. I think also actually I do want to say a little bit more that I think it's actually very sad because I think that one of the main killers in a marriage is everyday life. And this is one of the big topics of everyday life. And I recognize this, and I talk to a lot of women. Like when you have kids, and I don't know if you need to have kids to really get this reference, and especially living in the north, like when they're like 5 and it's winter, they're having like so much clothes on. And at some, I don't even know why, but they reach this stage where they're like so slow. Everything is like slow motion, and you have a deadline and you need to like put them to kindergarten and whatever, and they're learning to take on their clothes themselves. And this will literally kill every parent. So what you end up doing is stressing them and being fucking annoyed. And this is the exact same principle that we do as women. Like the first time a man fucks up like the plan that we had in our head, we do it for them. And I think like that's such a misunderstanding that we as women really need to take responsibility too. That it doesn't matter how the table is set or actually how the dishes are in the dishwasher. Look at the intention behind. Like, do you
Mm.
want to have this balance? Do you want to have the peace, or do you want to have like the last word? So like relax and like look at it like a little more freely and allow the man to make the mistakes. He didn't train this since he was 5 because we have like for play like tools like to do these things. So like lighten up, women, and give your man a chance.
I'm noticing that when we do this, every single topic is possibly done on the other gender, and it becomes a human topic. Like we talked about last time when we were preparing, is that I can think of as many men and women who would be in the bucket of what we describe as the archetypal masculine or feminine. Like I know guys who are the ones putting in the dishwasher bitching to their wife, and I know
Mm,
women who do the same. And so
yeah.
it kind of makes me smile that, like, in a way, I think there are areas where gendering is completely arbitrary, and there's areas where it's still very, very real. And the next one I wanted to ask forgiveness for on behalf of men is, I think, one of those that's still very fundamentally real, um, which is money, the topic of money. And we talk a lot about gender equality, very little about gender equity, as in what was really needed versus what is given as a resource equally. But I think there's an elephant in the room, which is that still globally, women and men do not have equal access to money. And I'm thinking now in particular to that gender division of roles that is not so much in the Nordics, but a lot elsewhere, where the man often goes out and provides, and for the family, and the woman comes as the sort of child keeper, which is in Scandinavia absolutely not anymore the norm. There's a lot of men who stay at home, but it's still statistically a dominant model in society around the world. And when that happens, the man often goes home feeling entitled to being looked after and put the seats, newspaper, television on, look after myself, and let everything around me happen, while the wife might be in a full combat mode of dealing with everything and everybody, the children, the food, and everything. I'm not saying that that's how I've experienced it, but I know that that has. And in that dynamic, what is, I think, deeply unfair and hurtful to women is that if in that situation the access to money is not equal, okay, they might have a shared income of X. It might not be the best income in the world. They might be still, needing to earn more money. But in the couples, when the man goes, well, I'm the one who earned the money, so I get to choose what we spend it on when we go to the cinema or the restaurant, or how we buy our holiday tickets. That is deeply unfair, because how do we value and monetize the hard, possibly even harder work of being at home with the ungrateful reception of some husbands of all that internal work, when the money is not equally shared there? And of course, that goes in the workplace with, equal pay, which is a very common topic in social media. But this one I want to bring from the home, when you have a shared bank account and that one is the breadwinner and the other one is not, that the one who's the breadwinner, and actually I think this can be also applied to women, but particularly men come home and say, I was the one who earned the money, therefore I get more say than you in how we should spend it, and I'm going to make you feel guilty for not having earned the money. And for that, on behalf of men, I ask forgiveness to all of women who've experienced that.
On behalf of women, I forgive you, and I thank you for acknowledging it. I think that's a really big topic for a lot of women, so thank you for mentioning it.
I feel like we should be filling all these sounds of silence, but I think it's very important that we're slowing down into this conversation. This is not like podcasting. Hey, we win. I like this slowness. So thank you for taking the time to think and be silent.
No, yeah, this is just natural for me, but thank you for pointing it out. I would like to also ask forgiveness because there is so much focus on men being like suppressor, being like, of course, you are in general more physical stronger than us. But I think that as females, we are sometimes caught in the role of actually being an emotional bully. Like, this could also go both ways, but I think it's very common in women that we pressure you emotionally, and that can be shown as that we just keep going. We keep putting pressure on where we know that you are the weakest, and we just keep pushing, 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 pushing. Or on the opposite, that's, I think a lot of female does this as well, just ignores the man. And this is actually something that is praised and made fun of as like that's such a feminine thing. That's how I get my will as a woman. I'm just ignoring him. And that is like such a mean thing to do. And it has such a deep impact on the person you do it to. So, on behalf of women, I would really love to ask for your forgiveness for all the time that we are actually suppressing you as a man.
Emotional bullying, on the point that the men are usually the least comfortable, is resonating not just within me, but also I think with a lot of brothers who have shared stories of being emotionally aggressed, actually blackmailed. And on behalf of men, I see why that is. I see where that is coming from. I see the insecurities that might be also hiding, and the frustrations of not being able to get through and influence the man, and perhaps one of the reasons why that is done. So I see that, and on behalf of men, I forgive all of women who do that.
Thank you.
I've got another one on a topic that is sex. It's so, as we talked about in the first few sessions, I've been very interested in Tantra, so are you. I've been exploring these topics, and I talk a lot about sex with men and with women as well, and non-gendered conversations as well, by the way. And the men are often at first deeply insecure about their performance because they're just like, am I good enough? And then when they start becoming more confident, they're over focused on their performance. And I mean performance by literally just being hard, by pleasing the other, doing the right type of foreplay, being kind and respectful enough in the bedroom. And very few men have I met who actually go beyond the performance topic and surrender to the present moment of just being connected, because that performance issue is so like intrinsically built into a lot of male sexuality. And so that goes down dark roads. It can be very very just like funny, like a guy being insecure about having performance issues and going to his shrink or taking Viagra, and some women mock that and be very disregard. But others, men, are in some cases taking that so far that then it turns into rape. Like, I need to perform. So on behalf of men who have been focused more on their own sexual needs than their partner, who have been, for various reasons, whether it's because they're afraid of the pain that happens in their, in sorry to be quite explicit, but pain in their balls from not ejaculating. Many men actually say, oh, that's why. That does not justify rape. That does not justify any form of abusive behavior sexually. But the performance issues are often a red thread across all of this. Is, am I man enough? If you look at groups of men who talk about rape, some of them don't condone it. And the reason they don't is because they're celebrating each other's performance. And so on behalf of men who are unaware that their overfocus on performance is actually one of the triggers for one of the biggest problems in gender harmony, which is rape, is performance. And so on behalf of men, I ask forgiveness for being so focused on performance and being self-worth that it leads to those darker rapes, abuse, disconnect in the bedroom, at least.
On behalf of women, I forgive men for being so caught up in their need to perform that they cross that border. I forgive you.
I was half expecting you to say that I can't do that, because I think there's a
I
lot
actually
of,
also felt a little bit that, to be honest. But I think that this is not just me, and I think that's an important thing. And actually, I want to turn that around and say that on behalf of women, I would like to apologize for making sex a weapon that we use to get our will. And it can both be withholding sex. It could also be having sex without us really want to, but to gain something. And it can also be for a lot of times when we have as female sex with men because you initiate, and we actually don't feel like it, but it's easier to just go with the flow or take one for the team than actually taking up the discussion or the uncomfortable moments of saying, you know what, I don't feel like it, or you know what, you misread me and I'm not interested. So on behalf of women, I would really like to ask men for forgiveness for also misrepresenting or misusing sex.
Thank you for saying that. I know many people who would take that directly to their heart as a healing, what you just said as well. Thank you.
You need to say you forgive us. You don't need to say it. I'm asking you to say it.
I think that's
Can
good.
you forgive?
I think I need to chew on it for a few seconds, because it hits close to home, this one as well. Yes, on behalf of men, that I can see how that comes and where it comes from, and therefore I find it envisageable, possible to forgive on behalf of men, all of women who use sex instrumentally for whatever reason that may be.
Thank you.
I have one that was not part of the three, but I'll just put it there because it's sort of, it came
You can
to
take
me
one more each.
in the sauna this morning. I was reflecting on this. I went for a swim. It was snowing. And I was sitting in the sauna, and there was this middle-aged woman who came in, and I politely asked her about what she would ask forgiveness for, what she would want to be asked forgiveness for. And she was a bit like taken aback, obviously. But the thing that came out of this is silence. Men, when they are emotionally upset, often close down and go into closed down silence, no communication. I don't know what to say, so it's best not to say. I do this as well. And it can be extremely hurtful, the silence, because the silence leaves room for interpretation and assumptions and projections of why the silence is there when it's not clearly framed as I'm quiet because I need time to think, or I'm quiet because I'm pissed and sulking. Um, and so, on behalf of men who, when they're feeling bad, feeling unable to have a conversation or deal with a tricky conversation with their female partner or their wife or their mother or sisters or women friends or colleague females who might even be hysterical, who might be shouting and screaming and crying. And when, as men, our reaction is just ignoring and silent and closing down, it's not just hurtful, it just replicates and amplifies the problems that were in the first place maybe healable by just a hug. So for not giving a simple hug and instead just closing down, walking away and being silent, I ask forgiveness from all men to women, if you're willing to forgive that.
For me, that's the easiest to forgive. I think when I was in my 20s, I read the classic book Men Are From Mars, Females Are From Venus. And I think that John Gray, he actually gave a really good explanation on that. So for me, I appreciate that you ask for forgiveness, and I'm willingly giving and forgiving men for that. Thank you. I actually have two things, and I'm just gonna like bind them in together because I think they are connected as well. And this for me is more on the light side and perhaps not. But I would like on behalf of all females to ask men for forgiveness for expecting you to know what we think and for testing you. And that we are not more clear in our communication when we are expecting that you can read our thoughts and when we are testing you instead of saying what's actually on our mind. So I would ask your forgiveness for that.
Oh, I will so gladly give you forgiveness as on behalf of all men for this, because it's one of the hot topics we had with the guys is how do we communicate that we're not mind readers? So I gratefully take this. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
I
we've
feel
we've
like we should just continue. This is so
we,
amazing, but I think it's
we
also good to round up.
I think also it's just like a seed. This conversation, remember we started this conversation already back in the early autumn, and this is something that we found as we did it was so difficult to talk about, even with people who are so-called woke and opening these topics up in their own minds regularly, let alone people in the street who have no idea about and who are literally not thinking about these topics at all. So what I think this is also just a seeding of maybe the hashtag gender forgiveness could be
Mm.
something that we could potentially take away from this as a shared, like, I'll use it, and I'll use it around things like this playlist of African women that I put in the background that I'm listening to at the moment. And some people will go, what the hell, what the fuck, why are you talking about gender forgiveness and posting a playlist about women? That's on them. I think the takeaway for me is that communication misunderstandings are always going to happen, but ultimately it comes down to, are we owning our misunderstandings or are we projecting onto the others? Are we owning our triggers or are we projecting them onto the other, including the other gender? And are we doing our work on ourselves before pointing the finger on others? And it's a beginning of a journey that we both have been on for years, but that I hope that this session would just be like a tiny little seed for some to be like, okay, I could do that too. What could I ask forgiveness for on
Yeah.
behalf of me or other in the gender roles?
I think for me, I think this was after our last call, but if I said this before, please stop me. But I myself used to do so many posts, and you can see them on my social media if you scroll down, like on like being an awakened woman, being a strong woman means that it's lonely, that it's difficult to find a man, that like there's like all of these like boxes that you put yourself on when it's about being like this strong woke woman. And after our last talk, I saw a woman that I consider to also be in that level, writing one of these poems. It wasn't her own, it was just something shared. And see, it was about, again, like when you are a deep woman, you'll have deep conversation, and men don't like that. When you are a deep woman, you do this and this and this. And I'm pretty sure that she did that to empower other women for perhaps being single or being a deep woman. But I was actually thinking, well, how is this helping us getting down from the mountain? That's not. That's actually stating that we are on that mountain. And I'm not
Mm,
seeing how does this helps us. And for me, that would be a beautiful moment to actually touch those women who's also influencing a lot of other females to be like, hey, you're right. It is difficult to be a deep woman, but let's look at what do we do from here instead of just stating it and waiting to be saved.
mm.
So for me, that would be a perfect hashtag gender forgiveness.
That's sort of echoing in the whole, deeply archetypal savior role of the masculine, where, like, because I surround myself with guys that like deep, meaningful conversations. So often they say, "Oh, I can't have a deep conversation with my wife because they just want to talk about mundane things." And I'm
Mm,
craving to have those deep, meaningful conversation with us dudes. Okay, so I don't think it's a gendered thing. I think deep, meaningful conversation is part of the human panel of needs that some tap into, regardless of gender. And the metaphor of the mountain, where we climb down from the high horse of moral high ground of being a gender warrior in one way or another, like the metaphor that we used already last time we spoke, is that coming down the mountain, meeting in the valley, and saying, okay, well, how do we harmonize? Is a topic that, what I'm taking away from this is, how do we talk about gender without replicating the divide, which
yes.
is kind of almost like a war in some case, two mountaintops shouting at each other, blaming each other. Okay, yes, okay, we get down from the mountain, we go to the forest, sit by the stream, have a laugh, but is not talking about something the solution? Like, it seems that often people's strategy for dealing with gender challenges is silence, not talking. But silence is actually giving power to a topic. When you taboo something, you give it power.
Yeah, no, I'm actually not suggesting at all that we don't talk about it. I think we
Mm,
first need to realize that we are on these mountaintops, but
mm,
that cannot stand alone,
mm,
because then it's just keeping us there. So I think it could be actually also to be more vulnerable, because that's like if you do this post, and of course I don't know her intention, I just want to say that. It's like, yeah, I'm a deep woman and I'm not being met and having these deep conversation and it's lonely. And hey, is there any guys, men out there who's also longing for deep conversations? How do we
mm.
meet up and have these deep conversations together? Because I'm feeling lonely and I would love to actually have you men being my coast, because I'm a roaring ocean and I would love to have you there. I think that's the important, that we take it that step further. Because if I'm just like, yeah, I'm a deep woman, I'm having difficulty having deep conversation, also allow myself as a female to be
Mm.
vulnerable and say like, hey, this is actually about I'm missing something and I feel lonely.
Beautifully said. Thank you for adding that. And I also feel now called towards doing a post as a follow up to this at some point around using the hashtag gender forgiveness, and with a particular focus on expression of needs. Because whether it's men or women or any other divide than gender, by the way, we could be cultural divides, age divides, disability divides. Um, if everybody takes responsibility for their needs and expressing those non-violently and non sort of ultimatum, like, it's not I need this so you have to give it to me, but actually just say, hey, I have a need to be seen, I have a need to be heard, I have a need to be worshipped, I have a need for meaningful conversation, I have a need for being whatever, for
Perhaps not even using the word need, but I have a longing, because I think in the word need there is also a demand.
and yeah, and what you just said is actually one of the misunderstandings between gender that I've noticed, is that when somebody expresses a need, the other assumes that it has to be fulfilled by somebody, particularly them. But the rune that you're wearing around your neck, the need rune, is a lot to do with also this of the fire, the symbolic two sticks that rub each other and create a spark of something new, something passionate, something fiery. I think behind need is not necessarily just a bad and an expectancy of fulfillment, but there's also simply the potential for something new, a spark of something new behind a need. When it becomes fulfilled, there's an unknown spark that can emerge. So yes, of course, the need implies somebody fulfilling it, but it doesn't have to be if the formulation is clear. Like I can say, I need to be seen and have meaningful conversation with other gender, and I don't expect you to fulfill that need, but I would love to have that conversation because I'm longing for it.
Yeah, I just think it needs to be specified, uh, like you just like you just did, because a lot of people I think would be triggered by like I need, because as you say that there is this miscommunication, and also it just shows that we're sitting here, two people educated in communication, that we need to clarify this. It really makes a statement on how important the topic of communication and giving each other space, and also being like, hey, that triggered me. Okay, let me explore that further. What I meant was, instead of me just being pissed, like, okay, so you have all those needs. What about my need? What about blah, blah, blah,
Mm,
blah?
exactly. And then
Yeah.
we go into the topic of conflict transformation, which is one of the bigger topics that we've been gravitating around over the last few weeks. So as a sort of wrap up for this on the live version, what would be a good way to wrap this up, Gitte? Do you have a particular checkout question, or should we share some gratitude about gender to sort of?
I think actually I will combine it, because I actually think we made a really good point just now, that the, as you said yourself earlier also, like I think the most important thing for gender harmony, gender forgiveness, is a good communication and being vulnerable and not being afraid of sitting down and having these difficult conversation with honesty and transparency. So I think my question is, how can we as women best approach this to you men? How would you prefer us to take responsibility for our half of the communication?
So it's a checkout question. Wow,
Yeah.
it's almost like opening up a whole new streaming series on that. Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we could both check out on that on both sides. So like, I could start since you've given me the question. On behalf of men, I would like to sort of check out with a little piece of gratitude that I would say a lot of women have been my teachers on communication. Yes, we can say that some are not clear and others are not being very explicit about the needs, and they're, using manipulation and all that. But I think overall, I've learned how to communicate mostly thanks to women. And so gratitude, even though there's a lot of great men communicators, I have done a lot of introspective quantum leaps on how I think about life thanks to conversations with women. And so gratitude on that. And if you were to pose that question of a checkout on request, or what could be done differently, I would say to to be particularly aware of the power of voicing the intentions. An intention is not clear until it's spoken, and it can be clear in one's head. I could be saying something to my partner with all the kindness and all the gentleness that I have in my heart, but if I don't say it, there's a huge space for misunderstanding, for ambiguity, and for projections from the other who's having a difficult moment, who's not seeing what it is, who's not looking at the body language or the tone of voice, and who doesn't hear the intention in the statement that is being shared. So if there was one thing I would ask
Women.
women to do, would be to, with all that emotional intelligence that is characterizing often women, to take that initiative to vulnerably share the intention, whatever the intention is, not just the words, but the intention behind the words.
Oh, thank you so much. I think again, like this is something that everyone should do. I'm like such a huge fan of intentions. um, I think if I should give men an advice on how to communicate with women, I actually think it's a little more like, I wouldn't say low key, but like a little more tangible or like everyday life. It's that reason and logic doesn't weigh more than emotions and feelings. That you are not more right because you have a logical argument for this. And it's also allow yourself to be patient. We are not as direct as you are. And allow yourself to ask, to keep asking. I'm not sure I understand. You need to communicate this in another way. This is like, doesn't make any sense to me, but I really want to understand you. So allow yourself to be honest about perhaps again not being on the same level, not that you're worth less, but you're less experienced in general in having these difficult conversations. Yeah.
Thank you. I took my notes there. I'm gonna debrief that with my men's group and talk about that as well. The whole patience, the whole allowing oneself to be asking when it's not clear, checking assumptions. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're now basically at the end of this 5 sessions, which was completely experimental, and you know, some people might find it interesting. I think the snippets of what we came out with, some quotes here and there, might be later interesting also for us to use. But essentially, this was a personal growth journey for you, for me, and for people who are close to us looking at these topics as well. Any closing words, Gitte, or any things that you want to sort of unfinished business on this topic for today before we close the stream?
Not really. I just wanted to be like really, what do you call that? Stereotype and be saying thank you so much. This has been such a great learning for me coming from a place where I thought like I knew a lot, that there is still the opportunity, always one of my favorite things in the world, to grow and to evolve and to have a deeper understanding. And I'm really grateful for having this dialogue with you and to have been growing. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, and thank you for being so easy to talk to, so open, so kind, so respectful. Even when we got triggered with each other's comments, you were still beautifully, generously kind and respectful with your communication. And that was a delicious experience. So thank you.